So I want to thank all of you who have already joined us for Ask Autoline. I'm sure all of those who are watching know the drill. If you want to join in the chat session or pose a question later on in the show, if you're looking on a laptop or the like, you'll see a screen off to the right-hand side. If you're on a mobile device, it might be at the bottom of the screen, but you have to have a Gmail account to be able to get in and ask questions or be part of the discussion. And as I've said, those of you who are watching probably already know the drill. I'm going to go over a topic that I think is pretty interesting for the first couple of minutes. Then we'll open it up to any kinds of questions that all of you might want to ask. But what's been occupying my mind lately over the weekend is what's going to happen if President Trump actually follows through and puts a 25% tariff on all imported cars. As most of you probably know right now, the United States imposes a tariff of 2.5% on all cars. That includes SUVs and crossovers, but it has a 25% import tariff on any kind of pickup truck, or any kind of truck, I should say. And so Trump has threatened to put a 25% import tariff on cars, crossovers, and SUVs. And I've been thinking about what the implications of that would be. And it's dramatic. Right now today in the US, the average price of a new car is about $34,000. Well, if you add 25% to that, the price of the average car goes up by $8,500. That would boost the average car to over $42,000. And you know what that's going to do? It's going to kill car sales, because even though the car companies that are importing cars would try to eat a bit of the cost, they can't eat $8,000 of cost. There's no way. And so sales of those cars, most of them, would come to a screeching halt. And there's not enough manufacturing capacity in this country, in the US, to make up for that difference. So you would see an immediate drop in car sales. And when you look at the number of vehicles that are imported, it's a lot. Over 8 million. In fact, almost half the US market involves vehicles that are imported from all over the world. And I'm including Mexico and Canada in that. You know, up to now, Mexico and Canada have been able to benefit from NAFTA and bring cars into the US with zero tariffs on them. And we import about 2.3 million vehicles from Mexico and another 2.3 million from Canada. But like I said, you throw a 25% tax on those vehicles, sales would come to a screeching halt. It would also ensure that only those companies that make electric vehicles in the US would have any shot at selling electric cars, because, you know, Jaguar just introduced the I-Pace all-electric crossover. It's going to debut with a price tag, a base price tag of $75,000 or $70,000. 25% import tariff would raise the price of it by $17,500. So there's no way that Jaguar or anybody else importing electric cars would have a chance of competing in that segment with that kind of a tax. In fact, this would be a windfall for Tesla, because all of its competitors would have significantly higher prices, except for those who build cars in the US. Like I said, total overall vehicles would plummet. I don't know how much. I'll take a guess. I'll say 3 million vehicles. You'd see a sharp fall off. The other thing that I think would happen is that sales of pickups would actually go up, because if you raise the price of an average car to $42,000, guess what? The price differential between a car and a pickup truck at that point, not much difference. And I think that you're going to see sales of pickups go up a lot. And let's get real. Without that 25% tariff that exists today on pickup trucks, there would not be a U.S. automotive industry. GM, Ford, and FCA make all of their profits, so to speak, on pickup trucks. And the only way that they can make that kind of profit is because of that 25% tax. Yes, Toyota has come in with a full-size pickup, and yeah, so has Nissan. And both of them, plus Honda, have tried mid-size pickups too. They haven't done all that well, but the point is they had to build those vehicles in the U.S. So even though a 25% import tariff would kill car sales, it might actually end up saving the U.S. automotive industry, because in just a couple of years, we're going to see a flood of cars coming in from China. And I wonder if that's what part of the Trump administration's planning is getting ready for that eventuality. So even though I would love to see everybody take all of their tariffs off, there's going to be both good and bad that happens if this goes through. Anyway, those are some of my thoughts. Let's throw it open and see what you all have to say. Kevin Fetty's up there first. He says, will these tariffs be content-based or source-based? They would be source-based. In other words, Kevin, any vehicle coming from outside of the United States, coming in by ship, or in the case of Canada and Mexico by rail, would get slapped with a 25% import tariff. Wouldn't matter what kind of American content is in it or anything like that. As long as you're bringing in a fully assembled vehicle, just like it happens today with pickup trucks or other kinds of trucks, it would get slapped with a 25% import tariff. Geralta Rivia says, would this push people to buy more American vehicles, or would the used market become more popular? Oh man, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was actually in my notes to address the used car market. And used car sales would soar. Actually, the market for used cars is kind of finite. It's kind of limited. So prices of used cars would soar. In fact, the price of everything would go up. Even cars made in the US would go up almost by 25%, because all the car companies would just raise their prices to match what the imports have to pay. So yeah, used car market going to become a whole lot more popular if that tariff goes through. Kevin Fetty's back. Would this cause foreign automakers to build factories in the U.S.? It sure would. They would have no choice. I mean, these car companies cannot walk away from such a large and profitable market. Yes, they would have to build factories in the U.S. And I got to tell you, Toyota and Mazda have already announced they're going to build a new factory in the U.S. I thought they were crazy. I especially didn't see why Mazda needed any more manufacturing capacity. I couldn't understand why Toyota thought it needed more. If this tariff goes through, the investment in that plant is going to look brilliant. David Glotfeld, he says, would GM's Bolt be exempt? Yeah, it would, because it's made in the U.S. And again, as long as the vehicle's made in the U.S., it would not be subject to an import tariff, even if it had a bunch of imported components that it went into making that vehicle. David Glafelti says, wow, how does Nissan sell the Titan? Well, no problem. The Titan's made in the U.S., so there's no tax on it whatsoever, no import tariff on it whatsoever. SubGR77 says, what did I miss? What you missed is me saying that if Trump puts a 25% import tariff on cars, it's going to kill sales of cars, at least for the imported ones. It's going to do wonders for sales of vehicles made in the U.S., and it could possibly end up saving the U.S. auto industry somewhere down the road. Jonathan Davansky says, couldn't it be a power play to remove the 10% European car tariff? And good, I'm glad you're aware of that, Jonathan, and you're right. Europe has a 10% import tariff on all vehicles versus the U.S. 2.5% tariff on imported cars and crossovers and SUVs. So I don't know is that it's a power play by the Trump administration against the Europeans. I think the Trump administration is more worried some years down the road, not too many, where the Chinese really start coming into the U.S. market. And by the way, the Chinese have a 25% import tariff on all American-made vehicles. So, or actually, I should say on all imported vehicles, not just the American ones. But so this is sort of a tit for tat when it comes to negotiating with the Chinese. I think that's what this is more about. The obvious solution would be everybody drops all of their tariffs. But I'm not a Pollyanna here. I'm not expecting that to happen. Kevin Fetty says, the big three could no longer import economy cars. They would go extinct like Ford's doing. You're right. I mean, unless you built that vehicle in the U.S., there would be no imported, inexpensive cars. The price of everything's going to go up. I mean, even on a $12,000 car, the price is going to go up to about $16,000. And that's going to become the new floor if this import tariff goes through. Gerald Rivia says, so even, for example, a Jeep Renegade would be taxed. Absolutely it would. because the renegades that we're getting in the US, I believe, are coming from Italy. And so, yeah, they would get taxed 25%. The new Ford EcoSport coming in from India, it would get taxed 25%. And I did the math on this. The Ford GT, which you guys know, is a $400,000 car, and it's made in Canada. Its price would go up by more than $112,000. So buy one while it's still a bargain. Tony D'Angelo says, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Toyota, Honda, Nissan, Volkswagen would be okay, wouldn't they, since they all build vehicles here? Yes and no. And the no part, you're right, they do build vehicles here, but they import a lot. They import a significant number of vehicles. In fact, I want to say with Toyota, it's roughly half. Half of all the vehicles they sell in the U.S. are imported. They would get clobbered from something like this. And again, they couldn't make up that shortfall with their existing manufacturing base in the United States. They're pretty much running flat out as it is right now. They don't have the room. The only way they can solve it is build more plants in the U.S. Karaga One says, if foreign companies choose to build new factories in the U.S., will they get subsidies by states who will fight for the factories to be built in their states, like LG and Samsung washing machines factory? Yeah. Unfortunately, all the states want those factories in their states because they provide a tremendous tax base. So they're going to give out all kinds of tax breaks. If this all happens, there is going to be a feeding frenzy as all the different states, or most of them at least, try to get those factories to locate in their location. Because remember, a typical assembly plant today employs about 2,500 people. But when you add on all the suppliers to that, it could be another 10,000 to 12,000 jobs that one assembly plant creates. And they tend to be much better paying jobs than you see in the rest of the economy. And that's why states want to have them located in their own borders. Zach Gaming Tech says, all American companies should not be taxed no matter where they are made. Well, I don't know about that. I don't think that's going to happen. Look, this is a ploy or a play, depending on which side you're on, by the Trump administration to get more jobs, manufacturing jobs in the U.S. I don't know if this tariff will go through, but just the threat of a tariff already led Toyota and Mazda to build a new factory in the U.S. Keith Taylor says, would Buick be in trouble? For every imported car they bring in, absolutely. You know, the Buick Envision that comes in from China, that's going to get hit with a 25% tax. And while Buick no longer brings in well, I was going to say they don't bring in vehicles from Europe, but that's not true. I believe the new Regal Tour X station wagon is brought in from Europe. So that would get hit by a 25% import tariff. It's a real simple rule. If it's not made in the United States, it would get hit by a tariff if this goes through. Joey says, Canada and Mexico should also apply this Trump tariff plans so automakers can just build plants in these countries and not rely on American-built cars. Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, that Canada and Mexico should put in their own import tariff to the same level as the U.S., and that's probably going to happen. That's the danger of going down this road, is that you trigger a trade war where everybody raises their tariffs, world trade slows down, and it drags the entire global economy down with it, just like it did in the 1930s. Jake from State Farm says, what is the import tariff on Japanese-made vehicles? I've been thinking of getting a new Mazda 3, but was disappointed to hear they're made in Mexico now rather than Japan. Well, it depends on the model, Jake. Not all the Mazdas are made in Mexico, and I should have the list here in front of me. The vast majority of them are made in Japan. But Japanese vehicles coming into the U.S. pay a 2.5% import tariff. We have today one of the lowest, maybe the lowest import tariff of any of the major countries in the world. Kevin Fetty's back. He says, these laws that take effect overnight wreak havoc on industry planning that goes out 5 years in advance. You're absolutely right, Kevin. If the Trump administration does this, boy, everybody, I mean, every single automaker and every single supplier is going to get caught flat-footed. They're not going to know what to do because What if Trump loses in 2020? He said he's going to run again. What if he loses? Would a new president come in and say, hey, we're not doing this nonsense, we're taking it all off? And you're a company that just committed $1 billion into a new plant. What do you do? I mean, it's a mess. You're right. These companies will be caught flat-footed. Jake from State Farm is back. He says, I understand why they make them in Mexico now because of NAFTA. Right. If as part of NAFTA right now, if you make cars or trucks in Mexico or Canada, they come into the United States tariff free. Quality is definitely a concern. I don't know, Jake. Look, whether it's GM or Ford or BMW or Nissan or whatever making vehicles in Mexico, they have the same quality procedures they use all over the world. I think you're going to find that vehicles made in Mexico or vehicles made in Canada have roughly the same quality that they do in the US, and the US has roughly the same quality that you'll find anywhere in the world. This is why BMW and Mercedes build vehicles here. In fact, tomorrow I'm going down to see the new Volvo plant in South Carolina. Same reason. They're coming here because you can build the absolute top-notch vehicles in the US. NC says, China has carried out a pledge to cut tariffs to 15%. Well, they've talked about cutting tariffs to 15%. They haven't done it yet. And, China has talked about maybe someday down the road here, we're going to let foreign car companies take majority ownership in their companies in China. But so far, it's just talk. And that may be, again, what the Trump administration's trying to do here, is change it from talk into action. Joey's Cleaning Lady, I love that handle. He says, building a vehicle in Mexico is about the same cost as building one in China. That's probably right. It may be a little bit more expensive in Mexico, but once you have to put a vehicle on a ship and ship it across the ocean, it probably ends up even Steven. David Glafelti says, farmers are screwed. They might be, because everyone who's retaliating against the Trump tariffs are targeting states that supported Trump. And we know that the Farm Belt went heavily in favor of Trump. So these other countries that are retaliating are going after farmers first. You're absolutely right on that. John Dennison says, hope that the EU doesn't respond with a 25% tax on Tesla. That will kill the Model 3. Yes, it would. And it would probably prompt Tesla to figure out how it can do some assembly in Europe, which it doesn't want to do right now. I mean, it's got its hands full just in Fremont, California. Joey's Cleaning Lady says, John Dennison at John Dennison, Model 3 final assembly is in Tilburg, Netherlands. Somebody else told me that there's assembly going on in the Netherlands. I need to learn more about that. I can't believe it's really, really final assembly. My guess is they're doing some sort of port of entry kind of additions to the car to meet European regulations. Daniel Casada S says, what will happen with factories outside of USA? I mean, they probably will have excess supply. Yeah, they will. And if this tariff goes through, they would look to other markets to sell the vehicles that they make there, whether they could export them to China, although, like I said before, China has a 25% import tariff, or if they could go to other places in Asia or maybe to Africa. But there will be a mad scramble to figure out where can you now allocate this manufacturing capacity. NC says, what about workarounds like importing sub-assemblies and just finishing it in the USA? That could work. In fact, for years, that's how Toyota did it with the Tacoma. They built a small stamping plant in Southern California to stamp out the bed of that truck, of the Tacoma. They made the truck in Japan. They exported it to the US without a bed on it. They stamped and assembled and painted and put the bed then on the Tacoma. And that's how they got around the 25% import tariff on trucks, until the Commerce Department woke up one day and said, nah, we're not going to let that happen anymore. And that's when Toyota decided, hey, we're going to start building the whole truck in the US. Joey says, I think Canada and the US are on the same playing field in terms of cost to build cars, unlike Mexico and China. Actually, I think Canada is right now the highest cost country to build cars. Or it might be Germany, but Canada's right up there with Germany. And that's why the Canadian auto industry has really taken it on the chin with NAFTA. So much production moved out of Canada, started moving south, didn't stop in the United States. It didn't stop until it hit Mexico. Kevin Fetty says, lose for Mexico. Plants would shut down and they don't have a lot of bargaining power, fewer consumers. Hurts the relationship. Yeah, it does hurt the relationship. Again, you'd see a mad scramble of the car companies that have plants in Mexico trying to figure out where they could export those vehicles. And remember, Mexico has more free trade agreements with other countries than any other country in the world. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but it's way more than the US has. So there is an opportunity, including to Europe, to ship cars made in Mexico over there with no tariff or extremely low tariffs. Joey's Cleaning Lady back saying Tacoma stamping plant was in Long Beach. Thank you for that. You're right. They still do axles there, which they ship to the Tacoma Tijuana plant in Mexico. Thanks for clearing that up, Joey. Appreciate it. Steven says, why is production in Canada so expensive? Their labor costs. Yeah, it's their labor costs. You know, you would think with free healthcare in Canada that the labor costs would be lower. That's not the case. I don't know if the Canadian union's just better at negotiating or what the reason is, whether it's got to do with taxes. But I can tell you, every automaker tells me Canada is the highest or one of the highest places in the world to make cars. Kwang Nguyen says, do the tariffs apply with models built in Canada that get sold in the US and vice versa? Well, right now, Kwang, the vehicles that are made in Canada or Mexico come into the US with zero tariffs. Vehicles made in the US that go to Canada or Mexico go with zero tariffs. For the auto industry, this has been a win-win from the very beginning. For auto workers in the US and Canada, not so much, because so many of those jobs did go to Mexico. But for the industry overall, it's been pretty good. Let's see, NC says, the New York Times states that the China car tariff went down to 15% as of May 22nd. Oh, okay, good. I wasn't aware of that. And Kevin Fetty says, didn't know that about Mexico, John. Good to know. Thank you. Joey's Cleaning Ladies at NC. Most major OEMs have joint ventures in China and manufacturing in China rather than import. That's true to a degree, but in fact, something like 1/4 of all the vehicles that are imported into China are made in the US. And the biggest exporters are BMW and Mercedes-Benz, who make SUVs here and ship a good chunk of them over to China. SubGR77 says, any news on that Acades engine yet? Nope, no news yet. We'll keep you posted as soon as we learn anything. Jake from State Farm back saying, regardless of how this all shakes out, I applaud your unbiased fact-based reports, John. Your journalism is a breath of fresh air in today's reporting environment. Thanks for that, Jake. Really appreciate that kind of feedback. Do we have more coming in? Yeah, we do. David Gluttfelt, he says, if you're trying to reduce illegal immigration, shooting Mexico auto in the gut seems counterproductive. Good point, David. Those jobs in Mexico are really good for making Mexicans wanting to stay in Mexico for the most part. And here's the difference. I'm disgusted by how little BMW pays its workers in Mexico. And by disgust, here's what I mean. They pay newly hired workers $1.50 an hour. You know what that translates into? That's about $2,500 in income for a year. They pay their skilled trades workers $2.50 an hour. And that works out to a little over $3,500 a year. Now, keep in mind, Mexico is a country with a per capita income of $19,000. That's what the average person in Mexico makes. In the US, it's 50 grand, by the way. So to pay your workers $1.50 an hour, your skilled tradespeople $2.50 an hour, and keep in mind, they're making $50,000, $60,000 cars. So to me, it's disgusting what they're paying them. Other companies who don't want huge amount of workforce turnover pay them pretty well. In fact, I know of suppliers and automakers in Mexico who are paying their workers $19 an hour. And that's what BMW should be doing. But if you're paying them $19 an hour, guess what? They want to stay in Mexico. They don't want to hightail it over the border. If you're paying them $1.50 an hour, number one, they're going to look for another job down the street. And if they can't find it there, they're going to come across the border. Okay, Joey says, I don't think Canada labor cost is higher than the US. If you would factor the exchange rate, then both are at par. That may be, Joey, and this discussion is telling me I got to do more research on why Canadian labor costs are so much higher. Bohunt says, I'm a Canadian and I agree. Auto workers are overpaid and price themselves out of the future of the auto industry. It's been happening. Srin Compter says, will this have an effect on luxury car sales? You bet it will, because let's see, Lexus and Acura and Infiniti do a little bit of production in the United States. Obviously, Lincoln and Cadillac do a lot, but that's it. Mercedes and BMW do have some SUV production here. Audi has none. Porsche has none. Jaguar Land Rover have none. As I just mentioned earlier, Volvo is building a plant here. So it's got a little bit of protection from that standpoint. Karaga One says, according to a 2012 Financial Post article, Canadian auto workers earn almost $7 an hour more than the U.S. counterparts. That's 2012. This is 2018. We need an update. And remember, too, you can't just look at how much they're making an hour, because with profit sharing, I mean, what are the UAW workers making this year? I think GM workers are getting a $10,000 profit sharing check. Not a bad situation to be in. Arno Schmidt says, I wonder how BMW finds workers for that money. Look, if you have no job and your family's starving and you're in rural Mexico, you'll go take that job. But here's what happens. BMW will then train these people. They'll teach them how to do assembly. They may teach them welding and wiring and other skilled trades. They'll teach them quality processes. These workers will learn a lot. After just a year on the job, they're worth a lot more money to somebody else who will pay them higher wages. And I will bet you $1 million that the turnover in that BMW plant is horrific, because you can't pay people such low wages and expect them to stay around for a whole career. They're going to bolt and go find more money elsewhere. JT50 says, that's why anything we can do to stick it to the Germans, we should do, in reference to BMW Mexican wages. Look, all I know is the BMW situation. It was widely quoted in the Wall Street Journal. So let's not just pick on the Germans because they're Germans. I'm picking on this one plant of BMWs in Mexico. I've got a lot of respect for BMW, except for this situation in Mexico. Okay, Alexander Karabitsas is back. He says, just started watching, so sorry if this has already been asked. How long would it take for GM to retool one of their U.S. plants to produce the Buick Envision? To retool a plant, I would say 6 to 8 months, because you would have to interrupt production at an existing plant right now. Remember, there's no more excess capacity in the United States. The bankruptcies and the Great Recession took care of all that. There is no excess production. So you would at first have to determine, what am I going to get rid of to bring the Buick Envision over here? And by the way, all the stamping dies are over in China. So now you got to put a bunch of stampings on a ship and send them over here, which is the worst way to do it. So I don't know. GM may even decided, bugger it all. We're not even going to sell the Envision in the U.S. anymore if this tariff goes through. Okay, Quang Wins is back to say, any update on GM and other automakers' proposal to standardize better and higher octane fuel? Yeah, and what he's referring to is automakers are asking for higher octane than what we've got right now. They want to boost the compression ratio of engines. And it's just a thermodynamic principle. The higher the compression ratio, the more efficient an engine becomes. But you cannot raise the compression ratio unless you have higher octane fuel. So I think what they've done is talk to the EPA, and they're talking to Congress about going to something like, I think they want 96 RON octane in gasoline. And they're talking about the early 2020s, 2021, 2022. And what GM has said, we had Dan Nicholson on our television program, Autoline This Week last year, and he said, look, the price is not going to skyrocket, because if you standardize and make, there isn't going to be regular and medium grade and premium grade. It would just be one standard of about 95 or 96 RON. And GM's estimate is that the price of gasoline would go up about 5 cents a gallon, but you would make, this is GM's argument, you would more than make that back by getting better fuel efficiency. Okay, Geralta Rivia says, should this tariff go through, would some luxury makers like Porsche be forced to open production here, or would they wait, since, as you said, the tariff could just end up being gone in a few years? Good question. I think everybody's going to figure out, if this tariff goes through, how can they game the system? We talked about this earlier. Could you do what the industry calls CKD, completely knocked down? And that's where you take all the parts in a vehicle, and instead of making them, you put them in a big shipping container. You ship it over to whatever country, let's say in this case, the United States. And now you take all those parts out of the box and you assemble them there. I'll bet that would get around the tariff, because again, all the Trump administration is talking about is creating more jobs here. So if this goes through, you're going to see different automakers take different approaches. And if you're talking super expensive cars like Ferraris or Lamborghinis or anything like that, McLarens, they'll just pass the cost on to their customers, who will grudgingly pay it. But for other automakers, you're going to see all different kinds of plans. Some will stick their hands in their pockets and wait to see if a change in administration brings about a change in the tariff. And you're going to see others trying to figure out what the hell they're going to do. Claymore XL says, do you think Ford will walk back from producing the aluminum F-150 Expedition Navigator with the tariffs? No, I don't. And of course, what he's referring to is the Trump administration has already raised tariffs on steel and aluminum, which is driving up the cost of those materials. But look, those vehicles are designed for aluminum. To try to change that to steel, and what would you save anyway? The cost of steel just went up. So no, Ford will just try to find other cost offsets that, make up for the rise in the cost of aluminum and steel. And if they can't do that, they're just going to eat the cost for right now. SubGR77 says, comments on Germany arresting the Audi exec. Yeah, thanks for raising that issue. It's about time Germany started to take action. What's this diesel scandal been going on for now? 3 years? And all the action just about against Volkswagen has taken place in the United States. The Justice Department went after them. Different state attorneys general went after them. We even have one of their executives, Oliver Schmidt, who's been on Autoline After Hours a couple of times and who we love dearly, except we don't like the fact that he was involved in this scandal. All of it's happened in the U.S. So finally, we're starting to see the German authorities move, and for them to arrest Rupert Stadler, the CEO of Audi, is a massive step forward. And believe me, this is not the end. There are actually bigger fish to fry in the Volkswagen empire. Even though some of those fish may no longer be with the company, you're going to see people going to jail over this. So very significant development. Okay, NC says, job owning seems to make sense to make this fair, but this will be 1930 if all the tariffs go through. Yeah, that's the danger. We all learned in school about the Smoot-Hawley tariffs that went into place in the 1930s that absolutely did help trigger a global recession, the Great Depression. And that's the danger in all this. I mean, we can say, hey, this is going to be good. We'll put on a 25% tariff and everybody's going to have to build more plants in the United States, and that's going to create more jobs. But if it triggers the second Great Depression, it ain't going to look so good. Okay, Bohunt says, how many cars are really made in Canada after all? I know of the Charger and the Challenger for sure. and the Chrysler 300 and the Chrysler Pacifica. And I want to say the Ford Flex and Edge. Some of the Chevy Impala is made there. I think they're now making Silverados there as well. I think Toyota makes Corollas. Honda, what do they make there? I don't know off the top of my head. But there's 5 automakers, GM, Ford, Fiat, Chrysler, Toyota, and Honda all have assembly plants in Canada. Milko Vasilev says, MAGA, make America great again. Maybe, and maybe it's a big disaster too. Karaga One says, MAGA has become a cult. Yes, it has. Jeffrey Rainey says, our currency exchange rate with the United States has been between 76 and 79 cents over the past several months. So Jeffrey's from Canada. Haha, you answered my higher octane gas pricing question before I typed it. Okay. Things move fast on Ask Autoline. Steve Heller says, or let's ramp up electric car adoption, which as a new EV owner, I can say is the best possible transportation option. Steve, I love electric cars. Write back and tell us, what did you buy and what's been your experience so far? Cody Ho says, hi from Tampa, Florida. Hello, Tampa. Addicted to your show. Thanks for sharing your knowledge. You're more than welcome, Cody. Great for having you write in. NC says, Trump and Elon proved that cults work. Boy, isn't that the case? That is so true. I think those cults are polar opposites, but cults nonetheless. Steve Heller says, electric cars don't have any emissions and use renewable energy to charge in addition to fossil fuels to generate electric. Yeah, Steve, I don't call electric cars zero emissions. They're not zero emissions. Lower emissions, you can say, but not zero. And it's not just where you get your electricity from. As I've said on Ask Autoline before, to manufacture electric car batteries is massively, I'll say it again, massively energy intensive. So your electric car that rolls off the assembly line, and I'm quoting stats from the Union of Concerned Scientists. This is not me making it up. It's not a car company telling me this. This is the Union of Concerned Scientists says, an electric car rolling off the assembly line, an electric car with a 240-mile driving range, starts life just rolling off the assembly line with a 68% larger carbon footprint than a gasoline engine car. Now, as you operate that electric car over its lifetime, assuming that you're not getting all your electricity from coal, the electric car does turn out to be cleaner. But I think it's unethical to call them zero emission vehicles. Okay, let me get off my soapbox for a minute and back to your questions. Chris G says, for many in the industry, mobility services will become huge business in upcoming years. If so, why are OEMs still introducing new brands? Wouldn't this make more sense to consolidate production with less brands? Great question, Chris. And yeah, look, there's too many brands in just the US market alone. In China, it's even crazier. And so to introduce new brands yet on top of that is a bit crazy. But here's the thing. Marketing people will tell you, if you're going to do something truly new and different, and you want to attract truly new and different buyers, trying to do it with an existing brand is so damn hard to do. Once a brand has gotten established in the public's psyche, man, is it hard to change their opinion of that brand. So when you look at what GM is doing with autonomous vehicles, they're branding it Cruise. It's going to be Cruise Mobility or Cruise Autonomy. They're not going to use Chevy, Cadillac, Buick, or GMC. They're trying something totally new, so it gets a new brand. Same with Volvo. They're launching the Polestar brand. That's going to be their electric one. They just felt, even though Volvo's got a pretty good brand image, people have an image of what that means. They want to create a new image, and that's why they're going with Polestar. So I'm just explaining what their thinking is, but I agree with you, man. There's way too many brands out there. Okay, Rideshare Supply says, watch Dirty Money on Netflix, episode 1. Apparently, Volkswagen did tests on animals, primates, to see if it's harmful to humans. Yeah, and they got clobbered for that, for testing on live animals. It's a moral issue. Do you do tests on animals to save lives of humans? Or do you just not do anything bad to animals and let people die? I'm glad I'm not the one making that kind of decision. NC says, do you think GM Maven ride and drive sharing makes more sense since they know their cars and telematics better? Yeah, look, I think Maven is a brilliant move on the part of General Motors, and I'll tell you why. It's ride sharing, or excuse me, car sharing, like Zipcar. So if you need a car and you only need it for a few hours, you go and you get a Maven car. And it's cheaper than going to the daily rental companies like Hertz and Avis and Enterprise. But here's why I think it's a brilliant move. GM has got a bunch of cars coming off lease. What do you do with those cars? One of the ideas is you put them into Maven for ride sharing. So you lease the car, you got all that money for the lease. Now it's come back off lease. Now you put it into Maven where the car can make even more money for you. And then when you think that you need something cleaner and more modern, you take that out of the fleet, you sell it as a used car. So there's 3 revenue streams off one vehicle. It's not a bad idea at all. I think it's pretty clever. Keith Taylor says, if the tariffs are enacted and then rescinded once this administration is out of office, will the auto manufacturers lower the price of the cars again? What kind of dream world do you live in? No, they're never going to lower prices again, unless there's enough competition to force it down. But man, once they get a price hike in, it sticks. Okay, Karaga one says, I'm loving Ask Autoline. Thanks for doing this, John. You're more than welcome. I love doing it myself. AZ Duffman says, join late, off topic. Is GM using divestments to dress themselves up for sale to Volkswagen, GM in USA, VW in Europe, both in China? No, General Motors is very confident of its future. In fact, Wall Street's starting to catch on to right now how well General Motors is doing. In fact, one of the analysts just came out with a stock price target for GM, double the price of what it is today. So no, GM is not doing these divestments to pretty itself up for sale. It's doing all this stuff to bolster the bottom line and drive that stock price a lot higher than it is. JT50 says, I'm not as concerned with a worldwide recession because Trump's tariffs are industry specific. If he tried a 25% tariff on all goods, then I'd be worried. Interesting observation, JT. Jeffrey Rainey says, did FCA announce anything about the Dodge Atlantis? If they want to replace the Caravan, they'll have to come correct and not up the price. Here in Ontario, they're everywhere. Same with the Journey. They did not say anything about the Atlantis. And you're right. That's the name of the Dodge version of the Pacifica. So my guess is there'll probably be an upgrade to the Pacifica, and then the old Pacifica will get the Atlantis name. But I'm speculating at this point. I'm not sure exactly what they're going to do, but thanks for bringing that up. SubGR77, John, do you need to watch that episode of Dirty Money? They basically tried to asphyxiate the monkeys with diesel exhaust. And yeah, they got crucified for that. And they have vowed they will never do that again. And I'm not going to watch that episode because I don't like to see animals suffer. NC says, GM's talking about doing a stock spinoff with Cruise, but it will keep the majority ownership of it for now. I don't think they've specifically talked about that. There's been a lot of speculation that GM might do that. And it's probably pretty astute speculation. But what GM really wants to do is figure out how can it leverage Cruise to boost GM stock. Sure, you could do a spinoff of Cruise, and maybe that will happen, and the stock could go through the roof, and GM would be a majority owner of it. But GM's real challenge is, how do you get the traditional core General Motors stock to go up? And maybe keeping Cruise within the company, at least for now, is going to help do that. James Earl Moans says, which is a better collectible, a 2006 Continental GT or Cadillac ELR? I would say that's a good question. I would say the ELR. And the reason I say that is, man, is that a rare car. And it ticks 3 boxes that I think that you need to have for a collectible to really be worth something in the future. Number one, there cannot be very many of them. And man, there's barely any ELRs out there. Number two, it's got to really look cool. And that car, in my opinion, I think that of a lot of others, is it's a really cool looking car. And number three, it's got to have something really unique and different about it from a technology standpoint. And as an extended range electric, it has that. So I would say it's going to take some time, another generation, another 25 years. But my guess is the Cadillac ELR would be a better collector's item than the Continental GT. Chris G says, we've Seat, Skoda, Volkswagen, Audi from the same group selling similar models such as the Octavia, Leon, Golf, and A3 to the same public. If global demand reduces because of ride sharing, will VAG kill some models? Man, is that a great question, Chris? Yeah, I believe they're going to have to. I think we're entering a world, and I think it's already started, where we're not going to need as many cars in the future. I think we're at peak auto right now. And as more and more ride sharing catches on, and especially when we get to autonomous vehicles where you can take the driver out, now the cost of ride sharing really goes down, because the single biggest cost right now today is the driver. It's not even the car, because you can amortize that over years, but the driver's there adding cost by the hour. So you take the driver out of the equation, that really drives down the cost of ride sharing. That means more people will use it. That means we're not going to need as many cars. And I think you're onto something there. I think in the future, and when I say future, we're probably talking 30 to 40 years out, we are not going to need as many brands as we have today. Okay, FOMO Co. 1 says, is Ford trying to close 2 of their U.S. plants? I don't believe so. I don't know. Maybe you got to write back and tell me what you're thinking about, because the only plant that is idle right now is the Wayne Assembly Plant, which had been making Focuses and C-Maxes. That plant's down right now. It's getting retooled for the Ford Ranger pickup and for the Bronco. And so I think that's what you're going to see is as Ford drops its cars that are made in the U.S., it's going to fill the pipeline with crossovers and SUVs. Sable Miner says, ironic because ain't that what was Volkswagen and others doing with their diesel fumes, but on a whole population? Sable's talking about Volkswagen gassing the monkeys. And yeah, weren't they spewing out this on the whole population? But let's get real. Yes, Volkswagen diesels exceeded emission limits. Yes, Volkswagen conspired to break the law, and for that they should be crucified. But the amount of diesel emissions that came out because of that is not like it was some sort of health epidemic. It's not like it went out and directly killed all kinds of people. It was wrong. They should be fined massively, as they were. Executives of theirs should go to jail. But in the grand scheme of things, you can breathe deep. It wasn't that bad. Chris G says, I do like the FCA approach. They're specializing their brands, Jeeps for SUVs, Ram for trucks and commercial, Chrysler for ride-sharing MPVs, Alfa Romeo for sports cars. Yeah, no, I would agree with you. But that's what every brand should really be. For a brand to be successful, it really has to have a target audience and go after that audience. When brands start to spread out and try to go after bigger groups of people like Mercedes and BMW have done, it can come back and bite them in the ass. That hasn't happened with Mercedes and BMW yet, but I believe they are diluting their brand. Chris G says, Maserati for EVs. What will happen to Dodge, though? Dodge would be performance. You know, traditional muscle car performance is what I see Dodge doing. Though, as I've said on this show and others before, man, I really wish they would modernize the Dodge Journey. Sales are going pretty good right now. If they had a modern, up-to-date Journey with much better fuel economy, there'd be people standing in line to buy them. David Glatfelty says, if the ELR has low battery degradation, long life like the Volt, it could be collectible. Yeah, look, it's the same powertrain that the Volt had, so it should be good. Billy Bob Hobnob 101 says, will tariffs help Tesla? Yeah, I talked about that earlier in the show. You bet it would. because except for Nissan, which builds the Leaf in the US, and GM Ford, which build their electric vehicles in the US, everybody else is planning on importing them. So if you put a 25% tariff on all those imported electric cars, that is like giving a golden gift to Tesla. It could actually raise its prices, not as much as the imports are going to get, make more money on its cars, and still be able to underprice them by thousands of dollars. Geraldo Rivia says, on that ELR question, I have to wonder if early EVs would be popular long from now, maybe as collectibles, but I'd imagine they would be obsolete as EVs advance. Would it be more of a novelty? Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. The Cadillac ELR, even by today's standard, is obsolete. It's not that it's a bad car. It's just not the latest technology. So in 25 years, it's going to be horrifically out of date. But you know what? Electrics from 100 years ago are very collectible today. You know, the Edison Electric, the Detroit Electric, very collectible cars, even though they're lead acid batteries that go maybe 50 miles. But because they were so unique in their era, that's what makes them collectible. And I would argue potentially the ELR Cadillac is also unique enough that in the future it could be a collectible. James Earl Moan says, what, if any, buzz have you heard regarding the development of supercapacitors in electric vehicles? Everybody's been looking at that for a long time, because the beauty of capacitors is they're like, you can zap them with a bunch of electricity now. They charge up instantly. I call it like taking a defibrillator to a battery. Zap, it's charged. And you can unleash a tremendous amount of energy out of a supercap. But for long-term driving, long-range driving, they're not good. There's been some interesting development work in Taiwan that I've seen that combines supercapacitors into lithium-ion batteries. So you get a little bit of both worlds, where you can have fast charge, fast discharge, but then have the lithium-ion battery for a longer distance. But nobody, to my knowledge, is using that in production today. And that tells me the issues haven't been sorted out yet. I don't know if that's cost or usability or degradation or what, but it's not, everyone's working on it. They just have not put it into production. Kevin Fetty is back saying, how did gas guzzlers become so unpopular in the early 2000s to reverse the SUV trend? Environment, could this happen again? I don't think the SUV trend was reversed until gasoline prices shot up fast. And so that's what we saw, especially in the 2008, 2009, 2007 to 2009 timeframe. Gasoline prices went up and went up very, very quickly. And all of a sudden, people backed out of SUVs. You had to stand in line to buy a Toyota Prius. But if gas prices go up more slowly and people get used to it and adjust it, it doesn't seem to affect sales very much. So that's the thing to keep an eye on, how fast the gas prices move. Gary Purcell says, don't agree on battery production providing more emissions than ICE engine production, since Tesla battery production has electricity provided by solar. No, Gary, it does not. It doesn't. That's what Tesla said it was going to do. Remember when Tesla built the Gigafactory out in Reno, they put out artists' renditions of the top of that gigantic Gigafactory covered by solar panels. Go Google Earth it. There ain't no solar panels on top of that factory. Why? Because the state of Nevada is selling subsidized electricity to Tesla's Gigafactory that is far cheaper than what it would cost to put those solar panels on. So go check it out. Tesla's talked a good game, but once again, it hasn't followed through on its promise, at least in this case. Jeffrey Rainey says, just to revisit this question, if the price of high-octane gasoline only increases a few more cents, is that few cents more than the current high-octane prices or regular? Oh, great question. So again, I'm going by what Dan Nicholson, the vice president of powertrain at General Motors, said on our show, is that it would be about 5 cents more than regular gasoline, not 5 cents more than what premium costs today. Keith Taylor says, if Tesla ever goes on the sales block, what automaker or automakers do you think would really want to acquire it? Or do you think it would be just sold off for parts? If Tesla gets on the sales block, I predict every car company in the world is going to try to buy it. Not as it's currently valued, because remember, right now, I haven't looked at the stock price today, but Tesla is probably worth close to $60 billion. No one's going to pay $60 billion to buy Tesla. You're better off going and starting your own company for a fraction of that cost. But if Tesla goes bankrupt and the price of the stock collapses, and now you can go and pick up that company for pennies on the dollar, it would still take a few $billion, maybe 3, 4, 5 billion bucks. You're going to see everybody standing in line trying to buy Tesla. Chris G says, did you hear about Zoox, the secretive Silicon Valley startup developing autonomous ride-sharing taxis? Would like to know which step they are on right now. Could you get an interview with the CEO? Probably can't, because you're right. Zoox has not said much of anything about what they're going to do. But I would also point out they're not the only one trying to do this. There's going to be a bunch of companies, a bunch of startups trying to get into this game. SF Motors, for example, is talking about doing that. Rivian is talking about doing the same thing. There's a bunch of them, and that's just in the US. You're going to see the same thing happen in China many times over. Okay, Arno Schmidt says, what do you think? When will we get autonomous driving on highways? This must be much easier than in cities. And yeah, no, we will. In fact, with the Cadillac Super Cruise, and by the way, 2 shows ago, we did a terrific Autoline After Hours with the chief engineer of Super Cruise. And boy, just about any question you could ever have about Super Cruise got answered on that program. But I think you're right. Here's the key. Super Cruise only works on highways. Why? Because you can map them. And to your point, Arno, there's not a lot of cross traffic, or there's really no cross traffic or traffic lights or that sort of thing. So that is a critical element for autonomy, 3D mapping. So even if it's raining or snowing or foggy or at night or whatever, the car knows exactly where it is. And that's why I think you're right. I think autonomous driving, level 4 autonomous driving, where you can literally take a nap in the back seat, will happen first in geo-fenced areas. And then the next areas to get geo-fenced are going to be the major highways in the country. David Glaffelty says, I had wondered why the Gigafactory pictures didn't have black panel areas. Shame, but they need to get profitable. Yeah, I would love to see Tesla put solar panels on that factory and do this all from renewable energy. That would be a game changer, but they're not there yet. C. Burgess says, couldn't you pick your octane with a lever that you flipped at the old Sunoco gas stations? Yeah, I mean, but look, the auto industry wants higher octane. If you're going to have multiple grades, that causes all kinds of cost issues. They want, like the different kinds of fuels to different kinds of battlefield scenarios all over the world for different kinds of vehicles. So one fuel fits all. That's what the auto industry would like to have, something along the same lines, because that helps keep costs down too. Ian Chauvin says, why do they not make cars like they did in the 1950s? Because those cars broke down all the time. Geez, you had to do a tune-up every 2,500 miles. You had to lube the chassis every 2,500 miles. Spark plugs didn't last more than 3,000 miles. I mean, if you want tail fins, I might agree with you. But for the way they were built, you don't want cars the way they made them in the 50s, believe me. SubGR77 says, how does Super Cruise deal with things like potholes? They don't yet. Okay. Yeah, we have some in Michigan that will eat a tire and a wheel, then chew on the chassis. Isn't that the truth? So far, no, we're not at a level of sophistication with autonomous cars that they're going to do anything then maybe, hopefully, slow down for a pothole. But look, this technology is still in its infancy, even though it's racing ahead. So with Super Cruise, you just go right over the Kevin Fetty says, autonomous vehicle crashes, while unfortunate, have revealed an interesting metric. Autonomous vehicle miles between human action With Waymo, it's over 2,000. With Uber, it's under 70 miles. Kevin, thank you for raising that issue, because this is what I've been saying all along. People see the headlines, oh, another autonomous vehicle got in an accident, or it struck and killed a pedestrian. That's horrific. And it is. But we've only heard these accidents happening from two companies, Uber and Tesla. And I'm arguing that's because they are cutting corners trying to race this stuff to the market. Tesla's autopilot should have a much more intrusive way of warning the driver that something's coming up. Something that's so obtrusive, like Cadillac does with Super Cruise, that they will drop their cell phone or their tablet and look out the damn windshield to see what they're about to run into. Or what they don't do either is disconnect the system. So if you don't pay attention with Super Cruise, it warns you. Then it warns you even more. Then it warns you even more. And then it disconnects and it slowly brings the vehicle to a stop. It turns on the flashers, by the way. If Tesla would only do that, and they can do it, that would solve a lot of issues. As far as Uber goes, they're just trying to race the technology to market, and they're cutting corners, and that's why they're getting in so many accidents. So when people criticize autonomous vehicle technology, I go, whoa, 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 whoa. Not Waymo, not Cruise Automation, not Ford, not Aurora. There's a bunch of companies out there doing it the right way. Tesla and Uber are not. Jeffrey Rainey says, it's interesting to see that Lightning Systems and Via Motors are in the same game. Yeah, isn't it though? Well, let's see who comes out on top. And by the way, I like that guy from Lightning Motors. I like what they showed us. Smooth Gilly says, I believe if gas prices go up substantially, all sales of vehicles will drop. People will just hang on to what they have and just use more of the mobile services. Yep, you're right. Simple economics. You raise the price, people will use less of it. Kevin Fetty says, really enjoyed the Super Cruise segment. Learned a lot. I learned a lot too, and I've driven the system quite a bit. Cobbett Top says, autopilot is a terrible name for it. Yes, it is a terrible name. Totally agree. I think everybody in the industry agrees with you. Sable Miner says, maybe he meant the styling of the 1950s. Oh, that goes back to the 1950s question. Okay. John, don't you agree cars the past 15 years or so are more stylish than ever? People say the cars all look the same, but the styling is really in a renaissance. I think it is. I think cars look pretty good today. Now, you can argue that the silhouettes are starting to look very similar, because there's only so much you can do with the silhouette of a crossover or the silhouette of an SUV. But other than that, I would agree. I think that and here's the difference. Upper management recognizes that beautifully styled cars help sell them. And when cars sell themselves, you don't have to incentivize them as much. And when you don't incentivize them as much, you make more profit. And that always makes upper management happy. So now even upper management recognizes we ought to spend the money and style these cars right. Tom Momura says, Arizona is going to launch cruise taxis and Waymo first. Which states next? Will states compete to relax regulations? No, I don't think states are going to relax regulations. In fact, if anything, we need, I'm not going to say more regulations right now. We need more guidelines for the automakers as to what to do. But you're going to see, there already is a race. Arizona's one, Nevada's another, Michigan's one, Texas, Florida, Upper California in the Bay Area. They all want everybody to do this autonomous ride sharing in their area, because they all recognize this is the next big thing. And we could and should see a dramatic reduction in car accidents and fatalities. Chris G says, Ian Chauvin says, do you know why major American car manufacturers make cars overseas? Yeah, because, the global market for vehicles is 100 million a year. The United States is only 17 million a year. If you're a car company, what do you want to do? You want to make as many cars as you can so you can make as much money as you can. So, I mean, come on, Ford built its first factory overseas in something like 1912. I think the first one went up in Ireland, of all places. Maybe it was England. Somebody out there will know the answer better than I do, but you bet. I mean, Ford and General Motors back in the day were the leading automakers to build assembly plants and not just assembly plants, engineering centers, the whole 9 yards outside of their home market. We're getting down to the end, guys. I'm going to run out of voice here in a little bit. Joey's Cleaning Lady. John, what are your thoughts on the workhorse hybrid pickup truck? I think it's brilliant, especially if you do it like Ford's talking about as a plug-in hybrid, so you can have power, electric power on the job for all your tools. I think that could really catch on. Class Act says, what color is your Fiesta ST? It's what they call magnetic, which I guess I would describe as a super dark gray. Let's see. Joey says, what are your thoughts on turbo engines as more and more automakers are switching to this type? I'm still hesitant to buy one as their reliability is questionable. That was true in the past. The reliability, they solved those issues. And the big thing was back in certainly the 80s when we really started to see turbos take off was the bearings in the turbocharger. They, a lot of people, before they shut off their engine, or at least used to, they'd gun the engine. They'd hit the accelerator and turn it off. Well, what that would do is, as you spool the engine up, spool the turbo up, then cut the engine, it would kill all the oil flow in the turbo, and after a while, they'd burn out their bearings. They have solved all that. I think turbo engines are pretty reliable right now. That's why I bought one. Okay, Gary Purcell, check on where the Gigafactory power comes from. Could be from Nevada Powers at 5 cents a kilowatt hour. Yow. Man, okay. And Davila, you know who we are. He says, John, whatever happened to Bose suspension? Are we going to see it anytime soon? Great question. This was an adaptive suspension that Bose developed that worked much like the speakers in your car. You know how the cone vibrates up and down with a magnet? Well, they took that same concept and applied it to the shock absorbers, the dampers, really the suspension, and that they could control it. The problem was, A, it was horrifically expensive, and B, at least when I was looking at it, it still consumed a lot of power. Is where they would like to take it on. Okay, guys, we've gone over an hour. We're going to wrap it up. Thanks so much for tuning into Ask Autoline.